Good evening. Thanks for being here on such a wretched night. And what a big turnout. We've busted right out of the temple tonight. I'm a little intimidated with America's rabbi and the God-slayer, Chris Hitchens, right here. Maybe you should be a little intimidated in this community. For all you know, I'm the son of snake handlers and primitive Baptists. In fact, I am, so we'll see what happens here. I hope that doesn't mean a prejudice in this debate. I made a mistake with my third child. I waited until she could speak to have her baptized. And when the baptism, water on head. And when the preacher, got the water with the droplets and began to put it on her head, and he said, "It's in the name of God," and she said, "What is God?" Let's just do it. Let's start with the simplicity of a child. What is God, Rabbi?
Well, it depends who you're answering. If you're answering a 2-year-old, you answer one way. But if you're discussing it with an adult, you begin with a recognition, which actually the entire debate should be framed with, of human limitation. In the following sense, when you were 2 years old, could you imagine what it's like to be an adult? Of course not. A 2-year-old has no idea what an adult is like. And yet we make definitive statements about God all the time when in every religion that I know of, the distance between God and human beings is infinitely greater than the distance between an adult and a 2-year-old. So when I say, as I'm going to in a second, I'm not going to avoid your question, but understand that I say it against the background of a religious recognition of our own inability to understand that which is infinitely greater than ourselves. My thumbnail definition of what God is that God is the source of everything that exists, and God is someone, something with whom a human being can have a relationship, and that you can live your life in alignment with a godly purpose. But any definition that is greater than that is in some ways to traduce God, which is why, by the way, the title of Christopher's book is exactly right. God is not great. Because to say God is great or God is something is to put a definition on God, which we know from classical Jewish philosophy you ought not to do. So in fact, Christopher's exactly right, and we can wrap it up right now.
Thank you very much for coming. It's been a wonderful evening. Yes. Apologies perhaps to Muslims in the audience who say God is great all the time. We'll circle back.
Okay.
Chris Hedges, to you, answer my daughter's question. Maybe you'll warn her off.
If you don't mind, it would be Christopher and Hitchens.
Yes, sir.
Chris Hedges is a horrible...
Hedges? Did I say
Yes,
Hedges?
you did.
Forgive me.
Chris Hedges is a horrible apologist for liberation.
Christopher Hitchens.
That's better.
Too many guests, too little time.
Sorry, but I exist too, if you see what I mean.
Yes, yes.
May as well start by establishing that ontological claim. Well, Friedrich Nietzsche famously said that God was dead, and Sigmund Freud can be rendered as having said that God was dad. And I think both of them are probably right. The concept of God is like everything else in our vocabulary, man-made. It's an invention of human beings. Unless you take the view that God made us, in which case it'd be a lot to explain. Why did we in that case make so many gods? It does seem to be very much more probable that men and women made many gods than that any one God made all men and women and the rest of creation. And as well as being man-made, it's fear-made. It is the unexpressed or partially expressed wish for a protector, a parent, someone who will never desert you, someone who will do in a way you're thinking for you, especially on questions of moral philosophy. At its best, it's that. It's a wish to be loved more than you probably deserve. And at its worst, it's the underdeveloped part of the human psyche that leads to totalitarianism, that wants to worship and that wants a boss, that wants a celestial dictatorship. And that's the bit that's now threatening to destroy our secular civilization. And so you're quite right to start where you do. It used to be believed, the number of gods now it's infinite, and a new god is created almost every day by some cult or other, but it used to be that. There was a belief that gods were in the trees, in the woods, in the springs, in the sea, in the clouds, and so forth. Polytheism of a kind. Then something a bit more polytheistic like Olympus, where there was at least a location for the divine, but it was multifaceted. And then monotheism, getting it down to one. So I regard this as progress of a sort, because they're getting nearer the true figure all the time.
I actually...
Rabbi, yes. Progress. Maybe.
Which is why, which by the way is why the Vatican, in its old days, was very upset by the concept of zero. Didn't like zero at all, the most important number of all, the number without which you can't do anything, which wasn't there in Roman numerals.
No, it was invented in Islamic civilization,
and unfortunately
actually.
also struck them as a sinister import from in partibus infidelium, from pagan lands, but also the concept of zero was very troubling for theism, and must be, and does indeed remain so. It's one of the many, many ways in which theism is not compatible with the scientific worldview.
Rabbi Wolpe, may I ask you...
I just want to point out, without even taking issue with the incorrect statements that he made, but I want you to understand, I want you to understand the progress of the argument that you just heard, because it's important, and people do this all the time, and at least you should be aware of it whether you accept it or not. Very often when people argue with you, especially when they argue about religion, they attribute their own beliefs to logic and your belief to psychology. So religious people believe in something because they need to be loved, or they need a crutch, or they're weak, but I believe what I believe because it's true and scientific. And I just want you to be aware that you cannot actually disprove someone's belief by imputing an unworthy motive to it. You actually have to disprove the belief. So don't let Christopher pull the psychological wool over your eyes. You can actually be just as worthy or unworthy of love, just as tough-minded, just as thoughtful, just as deep, and still believe in God, as most human beings have throughout all of human history, as if you are Christopher Hitchens.
Christopher, are you a trickster?
Well, I don't think that you couldn't accuse that of being an incorrect statement. You could accuse it of being an incomplete one. I didn't give all the reasons why people believe in God, but after all, you did write a whole book that argues that the belief in God can be very useful to people in times of crisis. Did you not?
No.
I mean, that's... and that's
yes, but I never said that that was why you should believe in God.
No, and I don't think it is the reason why many people do. But remember that there are two questions. Well, I better now say, lest I be accused of not having exhausted the entire subject in my first response, I better say there are at least two questions. One is this: is there a God, a creator, a prime mover, an uncaused cause, whatever you like to call it? And this was the question answered at a certain point, not very long ago in our history, by the deists, people like Thomas Jefferson, Thomas Paine, and many others, who said that the order of the universe seemed to suggest that it couldn't just have been random, that there may have been a designer, but the designer didn't take any part in human affairs. And that, in the late 17th, early 18th centuries, was probably, late 18th, early 19th centuries, was probably a very intelligent position to hold. It was pre-Einstein, pre-Darwin, was probably as far as you were likely to get with philosophical speculation. But so believing that there might be a cause or a mover or a creator is one thing, but believing that there is a supervising, intervening entity who cares who wins the war, who cares who you sleep with and in what way, who cares what you eat and on what day, and in other words, who makes you the center of the whole cosmos, is another thing altogether. So people who say, I believe in God, I'm a deist, have all their work in front of them before they can say that they are really religious.
Are you prepared to be a deist?
No.
No divine mover, even at the, whatever, the origin?
There's nothing in the natural, in the cosmic order, or that's the macro level, or the micro level, that's to say the constituent of our own DNA and the things that we have in common with the other animals, and indeed other forms of life, like plants, that isn't susceptible to a much better explanation.
Well, here's...
as the great physicist Laplace said when he demonstrated his working model, his orrery, as it's called, of the solar system to the emperor, and Napoleon said, well, I see there's no God in this system, and Laplace said, well, Your Majesty, it works without that assumption.
Rabbi, I don't want to play God, but to give form to this.
Sure.
It's 2010. You said you think of God as the source of all. In the year BCE,